Welcome everyone. We are really happy to have all of you here. This is a fabulous crowd. So we knew when we had all these celebrities here that we had a crowd. So here we go. So we're going to talk about Framnas Township, but also just Stevens County in general. And these Thursday night programs have been great because we usually end up with people that have other little stories, and it just kind of snowballs into a really great conversation. So welcome, and there's refreshments. I think no, not right now. You guys have to wait. So we are very pleased to have our guests who have a lot of family generational history in Framnas Township. We have Carl and Linda Retzlaff and Jerry Edisvold, and Joyce is just sitting over here letting Jerry kind of do his thing. So let him shine. Let him shine. Okay. So and I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities to share stories and questions and whatever. And so I'm just gonna let you guys start wherever you want. So we have a few pictures to go on. Get my hands on that. I'm right over here.
There's probably more people in the audience than there are in Framnas Township. The way it looks to me right now. But I was thinking, Framnas is kind of a unique township. It's got the Chippewa River on the east side of it, and it's got the Pombeter River on the west side, and it's got several lakes in between and a lot of gently rolling ground that goes in between, so it makes for a nice, unique township. I have some history here, and a lot of it is the history that I got is thanks to our daughter, who over 50 years ago did a project for 4-H, and it was called, well, she did it's my heritage. She did Framnas Township, her church, our community, and she did take her information to the state fair, and she got a purple ribbon on her book. So I had good access to it, and we had a good relationship with Carol Day, who helped us get a lot of our information together. So I might be reading too much, but I do have some pretty good history here. Framnas Township was the home of the first settlers that come to Stevens County. They were Norwegians who had settled in southern Minnesota. From there they came by covered wagons, pulled by oxen. They picked a desirable spot with rolling land and small lakes. They settled near the lakes and lived in their wagons until they could make dugouts in the hillside. The township settled mainly by Norwegians, and Swan Lake was by Germans and Swedes, and there's probably more descendants of early pioneers still living in the county than any other township. Framnas Township had many firsts. It had the first church and cemetery in the county, the first school. The first school was in the what was the Framnas Town Hall for many years. It was along County Road number 3. Now, it also had the first post office, and some information that we had, and we really can't verify it 100%, but it was said that the first post office was in the granary on the farm that my brother Kurt and I grew up on. So we kind of
This business about the post office, we never quite sure just where it was. And Jerry thinks it was on your farm, didn't you?
Yeah.
We thought it was on the other farm, so. I went for years and never got one Valentine. And we had 4-H calves too. And we hooked them behind the tractor and went in, told them to teach them how to lead, but we didn't start teaching them until the night before the 4-H. And so we got them in there, and we each got a red ribbon. And by morning, the cans had eaten the ribbons. We didn't have much luck up there.
Peter Bjork was the first to prove a claim in Stevens County. Lewis Hegland raised the first wheat crop, thrashing it by having oxen trample on it. The first at birth in Framnas Township was held by Hegland in September of 1867. And according to some of the early settlers around Cyrus or Scandia, what happened to that? I know Thomas Thomason and Hegland and Hansey were some of the first settlers in Framnas Township. My great-grandparents came there in 1868. They didn't get their homestead until 1882.
I have the names of those people. Thomas Thomason, Charles Olson, Thomas Hagen, Christian Jacobson, which would be Carl's great-grandfather, Louis Hegland, which would probably be the Hegland, the first baby, right? Peter Bjork, which is our lake, is Bjork Lake, and then Hans Gunbakken. So those were the first people that settled in Stevens County, right out where we live.
Well, most of those were like between our place and your place. A lot of it was around the Scandia Woods.
And that would have been before Morris was a town. Glenwood was already a town, I think, but Morris wasn't because, I don't know, something about the railroad.
So was your mailbox in a building or was it in a house?
It was in a building, as far as we know. We don't know much about it. It never really looked like a post office when I can remember. Because I just remember it as a drainage. Framnas Township was organized under the name Scandia on January 11, 1873. The petition was circulated by Eric Solsa, and the first election was to be held in the Holy Becky home. On June 7, 1873, the county commissioners ordered the name changed to Framnas. Many settlers were familiar with the cape of the coast of Norway that was called Framnas. That's why they changed it from Scandia to Framnas. Okay. The first church and first cemetery.
Oh, there's Framnas.
There's Framnas right there. The first church and cemetery was Scandia in Stevens County.
I think I have a picture of that. Maybe it's county.
What would you like?
There's a picture of the first
The sign.
first cemetery. That's our church.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there. So was that the first church then, Jerry?
As far as we have, there was, yeah. Because the cemetery was 1868, and then they built it for a few different years after that on the church.
So, it's these congregations that separated, one was the Peters, and another was churches that got moved to Morris. Where's
The,
Peters?
the building got moved to Morris. The church, that church had disbanded and gone into Cyrus.
So, what did they disagree on that they built two churches on a mile apart?
Is that the Scandia East Cemetery then?
Yeah. I'm not sure.
My daughter did a report on the 2 to 6th grade project on this, and the reason that they built another church was because they couldn't agree if the school should be attached or not.
And the school was real close to there. It was right in the corner of Grove where Peter Brand lives.
It was originally, the argument was about where the pastor's house should be.
Yeah.
Roughly half the congregation viewed that the pastor's house should be close to the church so that he would be on call for 24 hours and 7 days a week. The other half said, no, they need, the pastor and his family need to have a real life. So they were petitioning to have the parsonage actually in the town of Morris. As a result, half the congregation picked up after 2 years and moved a mile and a half to the east and built a second church, a little bit bigger.
No.
Scandia East is where the second church is.
Scandia East is where the
This was
second
first
church
one.
And the church building, I think was 1952 or something like that, was the last year that they had
52 or 56.
something in.
Something in the mid-50s.
Because I remember as a kid going to some Sunday school programs in that church. You know, so.
It's incredible to build out there.
Yeah.
My mother bought the bell from, we had a sale at the Cyrus School, sold the bell.
Talk louder, Carl.
Okay. They had a really big bell out at the cemetery, so usually lunch at every, well, you should look at it. And I was saying, my mother bought the bell out at Cyrus School, and brought it home, used it for a dinner bell. It was a pretty good sized bell. And we had 4-H meetings, and we had 4-H clubs in different houses. The clapper on the bell disappeared. Nobody knew where it went. And it was about 10, 12 years later that Ken Roosevelt was somewhat of a prankster. And he'd taken it out as a joke, and then he finally gave it back about 12 years later. We were never getting called for dinner.
No wonder you were so thin as a young boy.
We found the clapper, obviously.
So the first cemetery was Scandia East then?
No.
Scandia West.
Scandia West.
Okay.
That one right there.
Because my great grandfather is buried there because it was the only cemetery in Stevens County when he passed away.
Okay.
Great great grandfather.
Yeah. There's a lot of history in that cemetery, a lot of names and stuff that, some of the early families that built the church, were Peter Thorsted, Thomas Thomason, Owen Dahl, Peter Strand, Lars Hansi. The church property was donated to Scandia by the Hansi family. The outer shell was built, the lumber was hauled from Home City down to build the church.
So we have to by sleigh or wagon.
By wagon and sleigh. at first, after the church was built, they built the church and they didn't have enough money for the pews. So they didn't have pews right away, and the pews came a few days later, but the families contributed money in, and after the first couple of years, they had enough so that they could pay off the mortgage on the church. And you know, I saw someplace where the families each contributed like $3 a piece to help build the church. And interesting times.
I heard a story about cemetery, I think it was some, but back in the Depression era, nobody had any money, so people, if they had death in the family, they'd sneak into the cemetery at night and dig a hole and bury them. And the next morning, they had no idea who was buried there. They didn't want to pass up the paper a lot.
Okay, more questions or comments about the church?
Is it still used?
Scandia has a church service there one Sunday every summer. The last summers we meet outside, but we do have a church service there. So. With Trinity out of Cyrus, Scandia has joined the Trinity congregations in Cyrus in 1968.
There were a couple of weddings that were held out there in more recent years too, out of that church.
Right.
One of those dolls.
And to baptism, we had both of our grandchildren were both baptized at Scandia, and that's 18 and 16 years ago. So, yeah. So it can be used for different functions.
See, Jared, was that school, parochial school or public school then?
The school over by was a public school.
That's, so the first school was a parochial school then?
No, it was a public school.
Okay.
I know my dad went to school there until 3rd grade. And then the that school district was consolidated with Cyrus. And that school building was moved into Cyrus by horses and skids. It was, when we were going to school there, it was the home ec building. So, and then later on it was moved behind, was the bus garage, and it was converted to a residence. You know.
There was a tunnel going into the school, there was a cafeteria.
Right.
Maybe some of that tunnel still.
Probably the tunnel is still there.
Okay, this is a curiosity point. The one window looks like a quote church window, and the other one just looks like a house window. Was the one side indeed the church? It was a stairway.
That was built as a entry and a stairway, and then when they put a basement underneath, it was you'd come down that stairway and go down into the basement. So I think when it was built, on the back side of that, there was another window, because on the inside, you can see that.
Okay, so that wasn't a coat closet or something where the windows
No.
were laid? Okay.
Stairway.
There's a stairway there.
Okay.
But the basement's filled in.
Yeah, the basement has been filled in, so that there's no basement underneath it.
The walls are starting to cave in, so we built it with ground. Yeah.
The first picture in the pocket of there is the dates.
Okay, I have a picture. A group of the Scandia people got together after the church consolidated with Cyrus, and we have a stone that's built right there. You can see it in the corner, a marker. It has a lot of the history and stuff on it, and I have a picture of the stone, and on the stone it gives 1868. It was the first cemetery In 1869, the congregation was organized. The first confirmation service in Stevens County was 1882. The steeple was added in 1889. And when we put new siding onto the church years back, Carl had some surgery 2 days before, and then 2 days later, he was up on the scaffolding putting siding on the steeple of the church.
They were thinking that, as long as my body was that bad. The pews and pulpit were added, it says 1940. There was a kitchen on the back side that was added in 1947. It was wired for electricity in 1954. 1954, the basement was added. And the final service was held there April 27th, 1969.
Was that an extra service then? Because I know.
Yeah, it was a special service. They had dinner there for that. Actually, it was the 100th anniversary of the church also at that time, because we wanted to keep the congregation going so that we could celebrate the 100th anniversary of the church. So did that.
What?
Well, I have a little bit of information here on the school. Should I?
Yeah. I
Go
don't know
in.
anything about this.
I'll go into that. I mentioned that the school was right over there by Peter Grant. I was, I think, District 1.
So Jerry, if I put a map up, do you think you can point to where? Just a minute here.
It's in section 14.
All right.
Okay, it's by that number 3 right up the.
Right here?
A little further, it'd be a little further west here. Over, right about there.
Right in here?
Yeah, right back in there.
So it wasn't the town hall that we had on our road then? The school was not that building?
The town hall was in later, wasn't it?
Yeah,
They had it put it on the northwest side of the road.
right.
And there was a railroad problem as well.
Where the town hall was District 2.
Oh. So that picture, what, is District 2?
Yes.
So District 1 was by Peter Brandt's?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a third school, it was District 28, which is on, just south of Highway 28 on Lake Avenue.
Right.
That's where I went to school until I was till 3rd grade.
And that school continued until 54?
Well, I was in 3rd grade.
You gotta figure out when you were in 3rd grade.
I was in 3rd grade for about 6 years.
Jerry?
Yeah.
And I live in District 5,
Okay.
schoolhouse.
Yeah.
And if anybody here happens to have a picture, because the museum doesn't even have a picture of the school from District 5.
Okay.
So there was more than one school in a township?
Well,
Boy,
yeah, because the Stone Schoolhouse is District 14.
yes,
And that went, and that was built in 1908. And, I don't know, just my cousins, the Weirses, went to that school until Harlan was about 6th grade, 7th grade. And that was a long time ago too.
And there was a District 8 that was south of Highway 28 down by the Schmitz, down that area. Yeah, so by Charlie Schmidt.
Okay, right over, close through, that would be on, down about section 34, 33. Over in that, right in that area.
I can remember going to Christmas programs there. We had dueling Christmas programs from District 8 and District 28 because our teacher was the mother, and in District 8 the teacher was the daughter. So we did a lot of things together.
Well, I remember going to Christmas programs at your school, plus also Christmas programs. Our Sunday school and the Sunday school at the other church too would go back and forth to the different Christmas programs.
Yeah.
You know, even though they were a little bit different synods, the churches still met together. Actually, I do have kind of an interesting story, and well, Harold Choldahl used to tell us about it because he came to live with my grandpa and grandma when he was 13 years old, which would have been in the 30s. And he would tell us this story that, well, Choldahls lived where the Winkte farm is before that. And the Choldahls couldn't afford to have all of their kids. So Harold went to live with my grandpa and grandma. And also, at the same time, my grandma's brother was living with them, and Alfred Lee, and the Lees and the Olsons were members of the other church. And Alfred, when they'd go to church on Sundays, my grandpa and grandma would leave her brother off at the other church and go to Scandia for church, and then come back and pick him up after church on their way home. You know, just a little bit the way the families and stuff worked back then.
Did this young man that moved in with your family, how did he stay connected with his family, or didn't he?
He did. I think after they got a little bit older, he was connected with his brothers and sisters and his mom and dad too. And I'm not sure if he stayed there until he graduated from high school or not. Kurt, do you know? But it was during that high school time period, and there were probably my dad, there were 11 kids in that family, so that in the mid-30s, there were probably 3 of the members of the family had left home and were either working on their own or in college. So, but then the rest of the family was still home, and they had Harold living with them. They quite often had a hired man, Alfred, and quite often a lady to help Grandma with the cooking too. So our house, there were 4 bedrooms upstairs, and Grandpa and Grandma slept downstairs. So, and it wasn't unusual that there were 3 and 4 kids to a bed at that time.
So, Jerry, on here when you're talking about where you grew up and your 11 kids and whatever, where is that?
Okay, that's section 12,
12?
where Joyce lives.
Okay.
Or Joyce and I live right there.
You guys are doing the Scandia? Okay.
And I grew up in section 13. There were those 2 houses are right there in 13. Right south of there in the northwest corner of 24, a name that was good, what was the name, Goodenbach?
Good Vangen?
Goodbog, and that's where the Lee family lived, was
Okay.
right there after the Goodbogen. And my great grandpa Lee worked on the railroad from Little Falls to Morris before, when he was in his working years. So. Okay. Okay, your District 5, Vicki, was built on the quarter-mile line on the south side of the quarter of Section 8. It was also called the North Star School. The school was rebuilt in 1923. That's all the information we have about that.
Did anybody here go to that school? It's in the room?
District 5?
I think, like, I know Jurgensens and Dornfoss, they had gone to that school, so I don't know if there's Sorsted, Sandy?
Okay. District 14, which is the Stone School, was originally located at the Satter Farm in Section 19. The school was put on a stone foundation, but in 1908 the people decided they wanted the school more centrally located, so land was purchased from the Grote family and the stone schoolhouse was built. After the school was closed, it was used for school for handicapped children for a while. Special ed was there, and then it was the home Jehovah's Witness for a while, and later became the nursery now.
Very scattered.
Very scattered.
Coolest thing about that school was it had a basement.
Yeah.
A real live basement that you could go down and play in.
I was just gonna say, was it like, did you play games down there? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it was, for me, it was like walking into a cathedral. It had the floors were highly polished. Of course, this was before I saw the basketball court in Cyrus. But the floor was beautiful hardwood, highly polished, and looks like they oiled it every year. It was just gorgeous. But the coolest thing was it had a basement. We had to play in the basement. We had to play outside.
Well, I have a little bit more.
You asked a question about how the families kept together. I think sort of a sense of space might help. You saw where Joyce Ediswald is. That's where Harold Childall was growing up as a young boy. He was farmed out to work there. Well, his family was over in Section 15, where the Wente farm is, which is about 2.5 miles away. Also, the Childalls went to Scandia West, as did the Ediswalds. And so that was, so they were connected. It wasn't like he was shipped away to another world. He was just down the road because they couldn't afford him and they needed help.
Harold Sheldall told me one time with the different churches that I don't understand the Lutheran method of churches, but he said when He told me, well, when Catholics get upset with the church, they just quit going to church. And the Lutherans, when they get upset with the church, they start another one. That was straight from Harold.
That was straight from Harold.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too, because Harold has told us a lot of stories. And Harold worked for my grandpa. Harold worked for my dad for many years. He worked for my brother and I for many years. He worked for the Hansey family for many years. I know one time Harold told me, he said, there's a pretty big area here. He said, I think I probably know where all the rocks are located. Harold had a terrific memory. His memory is still pretty good. I talked to him a while back, but it's been a while since I've talked to him. He doesn't get around like he was before.
Is there any reason why there's only that one stone school in the county? There's stone barns.
No, there's a stone. Rendsville had the stone. Rendsville. It was
Is that a stone school?
the Rendsville Town Hall.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So was this one here a WPA built stone school, like the one in Rendsville Township?
This was built before the WPA.
Okay.
This was built in 1908.
Okay.
It's just a testimony to the number of rock that are in the field.
It was a point of pride to not have to build a stone school.
Okay.
Let's see, a few more bits of history about my family. My great-grandfather, I think I mentioned it already, they came here in 1869. That's when they filed their homestead claim. Grandpa went to someplace to buy lumber and came back with, he had just $1.25 left when the family reached their new home. And he still owed $50 for their passage from Norway. So, you know, it's pretty good. Clothing was mostly handmade back at that time. Great-grandma was spinning. In the area, there were a lot of prairie chickens, ducks, geese. The Chippewa River was about 3/4 of a mile east of our place. And they would go down there with a wagon, and they would bring home boatloads of fish that they would clean dry for eating later on. My great-grandfather lived on the homestead until 1905 when he moved to Cyrus, and my grandpa and grandma moved on the farm after they got married, and they had family there. They lived there until I think it was 1946. And my uncle and his wife lived there until we moved there in 1971. So we're the longest people to have lived on the original homestead. We've been there a little over 50 years now. Grandpa, in 1945, he had the honor of being selected Midwest Farmer of the Year. And that was from 5 different states: Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa. From that honor, he and his wife won a trip to Washington DC for the inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. There are interesting stories about my grandma. During that time, there was a tea sponsored by Eleanor Roosevelt. And Grandma got her cup of tea and her little sandwich, that was about so big, and went and sat down. And people said to her, "You aren't supposed to sit down unless Eleanor Roosevelt sits down." And she came back and said, "If I'm having tea, I'm sitting down to enjoy my tea." She wasn't going to let Eleanor Roosevelt outdo her. Another kind of interesting tidbit about it, both Kurt and I have our pictures in the 1946, I think, or 45 edition of Life, had our pictures in the 1945 edition of Life magazine. That's kind of a special, because of winning the trip and stuff. There was a whole article written about it, and lots of family pictures, and there was a picture of everybody in Grandpa and Grandma's family in that magazine, so that was kind of a fun thing. And then it was also written up in the February 5th, 1945 in the Congressional Record too, about history of Grandpa winning his award as typical Midwest farmer of the year. Carl and Linda, I'm done with what I have, except for taking too long already.
What were your grandparents' names and their parents?
My grandparents' names were Antoine and Rosetta Edisfold, and their parents were Mikkel and Anna Henriksen Edisfold. He came here as Mikkel Henriksen, but right away he changed it to Edisfold, which was the name of the farm that they came from in Norway. And he did it right away because all of a sudden there was another Mikkel Henriksen up the road that didn't have a very good reputation. and they were getting some bad bills from there. So right away he put the Edisfold on it, and it's been Edisfold ever since. Kurt, Mary, and Joyce and I have had the privilege of doing a heritage tour to Norway, and we were on the farm places in the area that both my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother came from, and there was a mountain in between them. So, you've probably heard lots of stories that they take their livestock up to the mountain, and top of the mountain to summer feed, and there would be relationships that would start from there. We were in the church in I don't remember the name of the town. It starts with A. Kurt or Mary, do you remember the name of the town that our we saw it in the register of the church where their names were in there where they were married in 1863, 64. Close enough. So,
Do you happen to know where the Wadsworth Trail crossed? Didn't that cross through Framnas?
It did, not real sure. I know that there's a sign about a mile and a half north of Cyrus that says Wadsworth Trail crossed here. Probably, just west of there someplace down where, because the river wasn't too, there were places there where the river wasn't too big. I know that there was a trail along the west side of the river for a while.
Where's this places on the map up there? Cause I'm not familiar.
So the place you're talking about, which is just north of Cyrus.
It's
would
in
be-
Newbury
Would
Township.
be, yep, it would be just a little, it'd be north of the red line, which is Highway 28.
Right,
Is
right.
Cyrus is just right over it.
Right,
Right over there.
it would be,
So
just,
maybe kinda like across the sections of the 20s.
either there or
Because-
section of the 13, I think. 13 and maybe a little higher.
Fern Wetley used to tell us at the post office that the Wadsworth Trail went through his dad's yard and down through the river there. They would find cannonballs and different things. So that would be up by Eric Wolf's name
Right.
in section 8.
Right, it'd be
So
up in there, so
yeah,
it
that's
would
what-
kind of meander
Through there.
around depending on how the weather and everything was when it was real wet, and real dry. You see, the south, or kind of through the middle of Framnas Township is a lot of lakes. So they'd have to maneuver around through there.
We have, at the museum, we have quite an extensive journal from Thomas Thomason, who was one of those, first settlers in Stevens County. And of course, he was Norwegian, so he, his children, I think, gave this journal to the museum, but it was all in Norwegian. And I think that they sent it to St. Olaf College and had it, translated so that it would be in English. So we do have some pretty good information from him and how he came from St. Anthony, which would be St. Paul, to Sauk Center, and then to Glenwood, and they were going to maybe buy land in Glenwood, and then they discovered 20 acres farther, there was this, to the edge of, like, I don't know, to the edge of whatever. And so then he bought land right where we are, and he stayed with Peter Bjork for a time with his family, because Peter Bjork was a bachelor. So they stayed with him until they could get their house built, their log cabin built. But we have quite a bit of information from Thomas Thomason. We're just so lucky to have that. And a few years ago now, our museum has written a book that, like about a 4th grade level, that is Thomas Thomason's, part of his journal, and there's beautiful art in there. So, something that, you might want to check out. What else can I tell you? Do we have any other pictures? What, I don't know.
Do you want
Well, we could talk about the log home.
Okay.
That was, so about 6 miles north of where we are. It was, the Brunses lived there, but prior to that, it was the Trontos, and there was a log home encompassed, they had built all kinds of, like, built other rooms and a roof over the top and whatever, another story. And they contacted the museum and said, does anybody want to save this log home? Because they're going to doze it down and turn it into farmland. And Carl and I were at the museum and we were like, yeah, we want to save that. Well, we had no idea how much work that was going to be. So,
Did you raise your hand, Carl?
we even made it with
All I
them.
know is my next wife is gonna be paraplegic and not raise your hand.
Anyway, we dismantled that whole house and we finally got down to the log home, the real logs of it. And Carl put Tyvek tags on each one and put it on 4 hay racks, north, south, east, and west. And we brought it home and it was fall. So we covered it with tarps, and then the next spring, we put the log cabin back together with his Tyvek tags. And it took us probably 7 years to get it to be the way it is now, because it didn't have a floor, and it didn't have a ceiling, and it didn't have a roof, and it didn't have windows, and now it does have all of those things. And so,
too this summer.
what?
Got reshingled too this
We
summer.
had to reshingle it now, just recently in the last couple of years. Yeah, Dusty, my kids did that. But it's on our swell property, and it is used for teaching local history. What a great place, right? For local history right there where it all
How many of
happened.
your people been out to swell or?
Do you want me to put the classroom up, Linda?
Yep, the classroom. So how swell started, if you're interested, it was 31 years ago now, and we wrote a grant from the Blandon Foundation, and we received some money to develop the woods into an environmental learning lab. So we built a classroom. This is the second classroom. The first one burned down, and we had insurance money, and we put up another one. So inside this building, there are binoculars and microscopes and, yeah, I don't know, bees nests and all kinds of stuff for the kids to look at. And in the last few years, we've had quite a bit of rain, so we don't have a dock anymore, and we don't have a trail that goes all the way around the pond. But we have other trails, and we'll just have to wait for the water to go down. So we teach environmental learning and historical learning out there.
And geological also, because
Well-
it's glaciers that form these hills out in the woods there. And it's really interesting up by where Randy Hager lives. That's a little bit up the road, about half a mile. And there's 2 big holes there. They're about the size of this whole museum in diameter. They're probably 30 feet deep. It's just like a meteorite or an asteroid hit right there, and there's another one next to it, and they're really deep. And I know when Gordon Fry lived there, he thought it was great for storing the river. I don't know if he had a permit for that, but
It was formed by glaciers.
well, yeah, I think so. And then on the side of Round Lake in South, I guess it's called Esker. And was that where the ice melted? A little under
Forms.
in ice river formed, and then it pushed out rocks into our lake. So there's a finger in our lake, York Lake, that's real shallow and sandy. It's pretty interesting. And somebody, apparently probably WBA, had dug a channel in between the Round Lake that you see there and the York Lake, which is right by our place. It isn't very deep, but it's about, big enough so they apparently thought they could drain one of the lakes. But it's never been dry up in there. But there's some beautiful, big, tall trees out there. And mostly, there's some oak out there too, but it seems like, Mike Haley told me that as you get anywhere west of our place, you don't see oak trees anymore. Do you have any oak trees? And why, we don't know, but I'm interested in the natural history there. And then you tell them about what's happening tomorrow too, and the conservation day.
Oh, yeah, so every year, the Hope and Stevens County soil and water people get together, and they provide a day when the 5th graders from those 2 counties can come out to Swell and have a conservation day. That's tomorrow. So we're a little busy. And there's like maybe 15 stations, or I don't know how many, about that many. And the students go for 25 minutes to an instructor, and they have lessons, and then a horn beeps, and then the kids move on to another place. So we'll have probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 buses out there, and it's gonna be really cold, but you know, every year, I think it's been probably going on for 15 years now that they've been doing that. So it's still being used. We're still making history, you guys, so that's good.
One year they had a guy brought a team of horses and had a great big plum. Great big, long thing went on, they got one here.
That was a rendezvous, actually. We've had rendezvous out there too, where it was very, just history. And we had somebody doing a loom and a spinning wheel, and we haven't done that for quite a few years. But yeah, that was a plowing, so the kids could actually see how that was done.
And the first classroom for down there had a little bonfire up and they went back to school and great big wind come up and just blew the coals out and the fire just went through one of these little fires right through the woods. And I'm sure you could have walked way faster than that. It was able to light up one of the timbers holding the classroom up when it burned to the ground. And we got out there in the fire department when there was nothing left.
Can't hear you, honey.
That's probably good. When we're at home, she's really happy about that. I understand this. But anyway, so.
We have that same problem in our house.
Really?
Yeah.
We can get vaccinated for that.
Carl, can you tell a little bit about the dugouts that you
Yes,
found close to your place?
The road goes past our place and a half mile up the road. And there's on the right, there's an entrance with a sign saying swell, block, and you can drive up there. On the left side of the road, there's about 4 acres in there that's really virgin land, never been farmed. And there's some dugouts in there from, the biggest one is maybe from here to the wall there. And it looks like they were about, I don't know how deep, they might have been washed in over the years. Apparently they moved in there and there's water close by, and so that was a good place to get down in the water there. Cow or oxen or whatever they had. And there's some more smaller ones around, so there's probably right in there. There's some up by where Rangers live too, up closer to where we live. And there's a couple small ones there, and there's a couple small ones in our backyard too that Dad and I thought great, put rocks in them. But they weren't very big. It looked like they were just like I don't know. It wasn't a Radisson or anything. So they must have taken saplings. There was probably enough wood around there by the lake would keep the prairie fires from burning off these trees. So there's some good sized trees up there that probably saved them from the fire. And I suppose they put some sticks up and put reeds and bulrushes from the lake and lived in there. I can't imagine.
I can't either. Can you imagine having a baby in a dugout?
How did you know what they were?
Well, it's kind of like my grandmother used to talk about that.
And Grandpa Roy told us that there were 3 dugouts right across the road from the swell entrance. And it was a bachelor. And he had one for him to live in, one for his animals, and one for storage, like putting supplies in. We've never had them excavated or archaeologically dug, so we don't know. I mean,
And most of the time, if those people moved, they didn't have anything, they kept everything with them.
right, they probably
These
wouldn't
cannonballs
find
and
anything.
shotguns or whatever. There also was a rumor that we've heard over the years that there was a bunch of ammunition.
Talk louder.
A rumor of what?
You know, I think you've got a phone call. In Chicago. I dawned on me.
Shotguns,
Pardon?
shotguns, what were you gonna say?
Shells, ammunition.
Oh, yeah, and Ranger, when he lived there, would go around with a mine detector, metal detector, see if he find it. Apparently they stockpiled this island after an Indian attack or something, or Indians around. So, but there wouldn't be much left of that anyway. But anyway, that's kind of what swell has done, other than the fact that every tree that falls down lands on the trail. We learned that much about forestry. It's really nice. We got a sawmill out there, and I heard if we get some nice straight logs for a long time.
When did your family come to Framnas Township, Carl?
My grandmother, grew up over where, I don't know if any of you know where, Sloniker's place used to be in the old days. And then, Bud Kayla lived there. And somebody else has bought it now, I haven't met, we've met them, but I don't remember their names. And anyway, she married, where Alan Parson lived, he had, Seaver Larson, and he had, 3, 4 boys and 3, 4 girls. And my grandmother married one of the boys, who was Carl Larson, and, he spelled his name with a C rather than an A. And there's an interesting story behind that, do you want to hear it?
They never told us what year it was.
I don't know if I can remember that far back. I think it was after the Civil War. But anyway, no, it wasn't that far back. Anyway, my grandmother married one of his kids named Carl. And Seaver must have given him a quarter of land right next our land, our farms are giant Parsons. He must have given them a quarter of land, and then they built a barn and a house, and mortgaged the land. And so then my grandmother's husband Carl, they found him dead. He had a stroke when he was about 45, and so she was left with Ruth and Martha, mother and her sister. And then he got a hired man once in a while. Well, it wasn't hired; he just lived there with the food and shelter, and they kind of got by. And with very little till my dad married my mother, and then they took over the farm. But she lived with us until she died.
But the Jacobson part, this Christian Jacobson, that was one of those first,
Yeah, that was
first 6,
that
would
was
be your great-grandfather.
But it's not just what that's
On that
range
other
that
side.
we were talking about. So that was kind of tough going for my grandmother, but she survived, you know. And this is going to make you feel good, but my grandma had always talked about that when she was by herself and a hired man after her husband died at age 45 with her 2 girls. She said that she would go into the elevator. And I don't know, is your relative, was it Anton or Earl that ran an elevator? Not Earl, maybe Anton or, yeah. But anyway, she would give him the screenings from when they cleaned seed. My grandmother, she was able to feed a cow, you know, because of that. So, thank you for your generosity. So, there's some interesting stories. But when you're a teenager at 18, you know, these old stories don't mean too much, you know.
No, they don't.
Well, no, you know, they don't. You know, I commented, well, a good friend of ours is Davis Grant. And Davis is 97. And we just lost a former neighbor, and the funeral was last week, and he was 86. And Charles Bright, 96. And I know growing up, they were neighbors. They lived on the same place, and then they lived right north of us. And I was thinking, you know, when I was 15, 16 years older than me seemed like a long time. Now when I'm 80, those 16 years are just like Joel is going like that. And that's right. You know, they don't seem so much different, but when we were younger, they did seem like they were a long time away. And neighbors back then, when we were growing up, they helped everybody, they helped one another a lot, you know.
I think I have an answer for why that years go by so quick. You get old and you have a mortgage payment every year. Those years go by like months. So we just didn't pay.
Well, the place where, you know, you mentioned Kayla, my parents always called that the Jacobson farm. For many years was the Jacobson farm, is what they knew it as.
Is that the one that we have that guy's got this great big fur coat on? He looks like a buffalo.
Christian Jacobson.
Yeah. And I know they always referred to that as the Jacobson farm.
That was a log cabin too, and then that just got dismantled. I think all the logs are gone now.
Did your parents or grandparents ever have any interactions with Native Americans?
I don't know about, I don't think our relatives did, but Thomas Thomason did. So I can tell you that story if you want to hear. I don't think, did you?
I don't have any stories about that. I'm sure great grandpa probably did, and I remember on one of the 40s that we had, there was kind of a hill on it, and they claimed that might have been an Indian burial mound, kind of in that area when we were picking rocks by hand. Every once in a while, kind of in that area, we would find maybe some tomahawks and arrowheads, and it was close to Lake Charlotte and Moore Lake, so it was right kind of in the area where the Indians would be living and stuff.
Okay, I'll tell you this story. This is a good one. Upon my arrival at home, I began to erect a log house on my land. It was early in the spring when I had begun in a small way to hew timber for the house, when I heard one evening at sundown a gunshot down by the lake. I am puzzled at first, since I knew that none of the neighbors were out in these parts. It occurred to me that the Indians might again be around. This proved at once to be the case. Shortly thereafter, a big Indian, fully equipped with gun, tomahawk, spear, and so forth, appeared at the edge of the woods near me and came right over to where I was. I greeted him with the usual "how," and we stood there eyeing each other for a while. He was an older man, but big and straight, and had on the whole imperious manner that he gave me the feeling that I was standing before a chieftain. His appearance, moreover, suggested that he could well have a few white people's lives on his conscience. I was not very happy about this visit. I tried first to start a conversation in English, but he just shook his head. With that, I took out my pipe, filled it with tobacco, lighted it with a match, and sat down to smoke. He then took out his pipe, filled it with killicanak, dried leaves from a bush, struck fire with flint, and sat down opposite me to smoke. But no conversation developed between us. I learned, however, that he was of the Chippewa tribe and was out hunting. Our company became a little boring, so I stood up, indicating that I wanted to go home, to my house. I took my axe and started off down the path with him at my heels. I had to go through the woods to get to the house. Here, he made a side trip down to the lake where he fired a shot and then came after me with a couple of wild ducks in his hand. These he offered to me. I now understood that his intentions were good, and he followed me home. My wife looked puzzled when she saw him. We invited him into our house, for which he seemed very thankful. We gave him some food, and he helped himself to it plenteously. After this, he told me by pantomime that there were several of his company west by the river. After a while, he set off in that direction. The day after, he came back with his son and their canoe with all their equipment and settled down in our woods. We became better acquainted with him and learned that he was the chief of the Chippewa tribe. Unfortunately, I cannot remember his name. We learned that he himself was a good Indian, but at the same time had bitter enemies of the Sioux, which he called bad Indians. He showed me scars on his body from wounds inflicted in conflicts with them. He visited our settlement with our group regularly every year for a long time and never failed to pay my house a visit. He showed me many signs of confidence and friendship. So I think that's fine. So I don't think there were any real big fights in our area, except maybe between the Sioux and the Chippewa then.
Yeah.
Is that, make dealings down the river bottom where used to be farm?
Yeah.
Was that the Framnas Township?
Yeah.
Most stones are from there.
It's where Todd lives. The flower town.
More questions or?
What about the round barn?
The Brent Park.
Peter Brand. And, I don't know who. Was that gonna Henry?
I don't know, where's Avis?
But, I don't know what the purpose of it was. It was supposed to be more efficient for the cattle to go in a circle or something. I don't know. Everybody around, I don't have.
Joel, probably, you know much history about the round barn?
Oh, I'm trying to remember, let's see, Henry was,
It might have been Henry's dad.
it might have been Henry's dad. I'm trying to, can you remember that?
Henry's dad's name?
Yeah,
Is that Peter Gransky dad?
it could be, yeah.
Yeah, that was 1906 was before, Henry was probably,
Yeah,
he was the same age as our grandparents.
So, it was a perfectly round barn, which made it, incredibly hard to stack hay in. Trust me, I know.
That's what I figured. You were involved in some of the work in.
Is that barn still standing?
No.
Unfortunately.
In the geological terms, just an instant ago, but for some of us, it's probably 40 years ago.
40 or 50 years ago.
But Peter was farming, and one day he was just telling me this. He had a truckload of grain, and it was starting to rain, so he just backed the truck into the hay mow, and the floor collapsed. And that was the end of the mow. But
So he graduated in '69 from high school, so.
yeah,
So on the top there, was there a chute that you could throw hay down and go right down?
2010.
The top,
I remember it.
the top, there was a silo inside there, in the center, wasn't there? Was there a silo inside it?
To the side.
It was on the side.
Where that wagon is now.
Okay.
There was a lower level where the melting was done. You can't see it on this picture, but there's a lower level.
Yeah, there was. The lower level was the milking, was the cattle barn. And the milk.
You're supposed to stack loose hay, not
I know, well, that's what happens when you get twine.
You mentioned Wadsworth Trail. How did that get originated? Was that a stagecoach line or was it the government owned or did the government pay to go across your land or did you just go where they want
About it in there's a whole panel in the exhibit on the Wadsworth Trail with a map.
Okay.
So I think your question might be answered.
But it was the trail from, like Carl just mentioned, from St. Cloud to Sisseton, South Dakota.
There was a fort there.
Yeah, there was a fort there. It's quite a few years ago now, but Carol Day had organized a one-day tour that started, well, we loaded the bus here in Morris and went out northwest northeast of Morris and followed the Sisseton Trail and made different stops along the way on the Sisseton Trail out to, or the Wadsworth Trail out to Sisseton, South Dakota, and Fortin out there.
And Larry Hutchins was here. He was out on the end here. telling you about a road that went through our farm from Herb Mickelson's, would have gone, there's a couple ponds in there, and went between the ponds, you can still see where they built up the road, and then, I think WPA made a cut through it with a drain. But that, it showed up on one of the old maps that this road went between those two slopes, and why they wouldn't have gone up the hill, you know what I mean? And then it kind of snaked over to Herb Mickelson's and then kind of disappeared, and we don't know if that's part of the Wadsworth Trail or not. Or they might have just gotten lost, you know? Some of the stuff's along with happened.
Eventually, came across and ended up at Gager Station, which was in Morris Township.
Is that from Marion Sharp had the wheel?
Yeah.
You could see the ruts when I was a kid at Jim Stevenson's.
Yeah.
Or Ray C's.
Yeah, and I know when we went on that Wadsworth Trail, when we were up into that area and saw where the ruts were and stuff as we went across through there.
You know anything about the flour mill that was down there on Bounty Terre behind Kalix or Thorsted's?
There's some pictures around that we see once in a while up on the wall.
Foundation's still there.
So it would be by Vicky Dostal's down there?
By Telus.
Yeah, well,
Probably in half a mile up the river.
Oh, by Telus, okay.
It's where Art and Dagna lives.
Is that the North Star? Is it a North Star?
You know, I think Telus got a little bit right up on it, but.
We got the North Star one in the, good.
I'm not sure if they know.
I don't remember it being there, in that little file. There's some rocks up the river a little ways, and we got the mill, stones or whatever it is.
You said there was a mill in Morris too, Carl.
Well, there's a greens mill, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did they do flour or did they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, we got a flower maple there on.
Oh, really?
Well, just across the street, that's actually.
That was a good size. What was it?
That was an old cabin.
Really?
They were on the mill.
Was there a railroad track going by that? Where did that railroad go? Back to the green?
Yeah, it was on the back side, yeah. Where the alley was.
Yeah, because there was an elevator dump on the back side too, where they drove through.
We were talking at Green's Mill. So the railroad track ran in the alley there behind. Green's Mill was where Ace Hardware is now.
Yeah.
And where Detoys is used to be a depot. That was told by my grandparents.
And that depot is sitting out south of Alberta now.
We just ran across a photo of the depot being moved,
Oh, really?
so they could put country kitchen there.
Yeah, that's what went there
So
first.
we have 3 pictures of that depot getting moved. We just ran across them today.
Yeah, I think that track, the spur ended like at 7th Street. And it just went in and fed that mill.
Yeah.
Green's Mill.
I remember when they tore that down.
My grandpa
Couldn't
used to
see
have.
anything in Morris for weeks.
My grandpa, Homer Anderson, used to be the manager of North American Creameries where Town Country is now. When you go in Town Country, you go up those steps.
Yeah.
That was the storage area, and it was built that height because the railroad siding went right beside it. There was a spur that went right along that building. I might have some pictures of that. He was there until 1952. Until 1952.
We heard a story that they were kind of messed down, but somebody was having muskrats and whatever, all winter. And we got the spring, he loaded up all his furs and headed to St. Cloud with a sled pulling it. And when when he got to St. Paul, there was no market for the furs. So we had to turn around and come all the way back with the furs and no supply. Wasn't much fun, I don't think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Well, let's give our guests. For sharing your stories and thoughts and starting conversation, and we appreciate that.
We're going on the road next week.
We're groupies now, we're gonna follow you where you're going. So, there's still some things back there to grab, and, thank you again for joining us. And our next event is coming up in about a month, or a little less. It is the Cherrywood quilt exhibit. And you'll notice that it talks about it being the 2020 exhibit. It's because they put it together in 2020, and we all know what happened right about then. And it just kind of sat for a while. Nobody was having quilt shows and exhibits. We weren't doing that, right? So it just, we're at the kind of tail end of its, started circulating again in end of 2021 and for a year, and we're kind of at the tail end of it. So in fact, I think we might be the last ones to have it. So there's this poster over there on Margaret's desk, and little cards. If you want to take a little card, put it on your bulletin board or your refrigerator, feel free to take that with you. Enjoy each other's company, and see you again at the next thing. Thank you.